You may have heard of this idea of functional training and how it is a superior way to train to get the results that you're wanting in terms of improving whatever activities that you're wanting to do. But there are some huge issues with the concept of functional training, and that's exactly what we want to talk with you about today. We're going to cue our introduction and dive right into this conversation. Hey, welcome back, everybody, to the Exercise is Health podcast, brought to you by Muscle Activation Schaumburg. We're your hosts, Charlie
and Julie.
And today we are discussing this idea of functional training and comparing it to what we believe actually should be taking place, which is training to improve your function. See, so often with functional training, we're thinking like, oh, we're going to do the activities that we want to do. And by doing that and making our strength training and our workouts look like that, it's going to lead to us doing those activities better. But the truth of the matter is there are some really big issues that can creep up if you take this approach to your workouts and to your training. So I want to give you some alternatives to that idea today. But we want to let you know that if what we are discussing is of interest to you, you want to start taking action on it, it's exactly what we can help you do at our studio, Muscle Activation Schaumburg, where we specialize in using muscle activation techniques. All you need to do to see our availability and get our schedule is go to www.matschaumburg.com, click the big green button that says Get Started. You can schedule yourself for your initial MAT consultation and assessment. So Julie, this idea of functional training, I feel like when I first got into working out, if from a professional standpoint, kind of 2010, 2009, even 2008, the idea of functional training was this really big idea of like, hey, we want to make sure that whatever workouts you're doing, that they're functional, meaning they're actually going to transfer into you being able to do life activities, whatever it is, better. And within that idea is an implied statement that, well, if you're not doing functional training, then the workouts that you're doing aren't going to transfer. If you're not doing functional training, then the workouts you're doing aren't going to help you to function better. And so because of that, functional training is the obvious choice. But there are so many issues with the idea of traditional functional training and that statement, both implied and actually stated. And that's exactly what we want to talk with you about today.
That's right. I think a lot of us, especially as we're getting older, we're thinking about, okay, this stuff in my life is getting kind of hard. Maybe there's like some exercise that might be able to help me do that stuff better. So like, here's some examples, like golfing, right? There's like this big giant swing in golf. That's like the main golf motion. And a lot of times when people feel like that's weak or, they want to get it better, they might do functional training for golf. And so what it is they'll do like a golf swing, but make it hard with a weight or a band, something like that. So it looks so similar, right? Or if it's like a tennis swing, or I remember when I was a swimmer, instead of swimming in the water, we would do the same swimming motion with like some cables, so for some resistance. So those are the examples of functional training that we see. Oh, I had another one last week where someone was telling me like they want to be able to pick up really heavy stuff. So when they train, they like pick up really heavy sandbags and they do that over and over and over again. So those are examples of what we're talking about when we're talking about functional training, where you're thinking of like the activity that you want to do, and then you like add some weight to it, and then feel like that's going to be like the best transfer activity for functional training.
Okay, can I add one thing to that?
Yes.
I think another concept that has been perpetuated with that is, well, the activities that I'm doing I do them while I'm standing. So that means all the exercises that I do need to be done standing, because if I don't do my exercise standing, then it's not going to have a transfer to me doing, the activities I do standing.
Yes, yeah. So that's another one. So the thing that's enticing to a lot of people is that, especially when you're not too familiar with exercise, like something that visually looks like it's visually going to help you with this activity gets really exciting or tempting for you. And probably if you do those things, you are going to improve, because you probably went from, I don't really load my body except this activity, and now I started loading my body. And most people respond in a really positive way when they start loading their body in general. But there's a lot more things that we really want to recommend that you do to make sure that this training to improve your function is actually really training to improve your function, even if it's not called functional training.
Exactly, because one of the big issues that we see with functional training is if there's any kind of compensations going on with in your body. And Julie, have you ever met somebody that didn't have any compensation?
Everyone has.
Okay, cool. So we can safely say that you absolutely have compensations going on within your body when you're doing any activity, when you're doing any kind of training. Okay, so if there's any compensations going on within your body, which check that's happening for you, okay? Then when you go and you do the functional training where you're doing the activity but harder with, added resistance or anything like that, you are simply strengthening your ability to compensate while doing that activity, which if you've heard our podcast at all, then you understand that over time, all that is going to do is there may be some short-term gain in terms of like you feeling like you can do the activity better, but over time, if you are just compounding your ability and your more importantly your need to compensate, if your training is just compounding your need to compensate, that objectively will lead to more and more dysfunction within your system. Because I don't know that I've ever come across a scenario where somebody's like, yeah, I'm functioning so well because I'm compensating.
Yes.
I'm feeling so great because I'm compensating. Now, don't get me wrong. A lot of times, like our bodies actually feel pretty well because we compensate, because we are able to, use other muscles to do stuff, and we're not having to just rely on the dysfunctional muscles and be like, oh wow, now that those muscles are weak and dysfunctional, I have to try to keep using those to do this thing. But the point is that like, if you are truly trying to build your function and you're trying to use your workouts in order to do that so you can do your activities better, if your workouts are just furthering your dysfunction, are furthering your compensations because you are just doing the activities but under greater load, under greater challenge, that inevitably will just lead to more and more breakdown of your system, more and more breakdown of your body over the next 12 months, 2 years, 5 years. It's inevitable. The timeline might vary for some people, but it's inevitable. And so we need to talk about what to do instead.
That's right. So what we find is that when people start training and strengthening the pieces, the links, the individual components of their body, then when they go to do the activity that they're hoping to do, golfing, tennis, picking stuff up off the ground, whatever your function things are in your life, that all the individual pieces are able to show up better. So a lot of times what we'll say is like, you need to do some traditional weight training, right? So when we're thinking about that, instead of saying functional training is saying, hey, you want to get better at a golf swing, so keep doing thousands of golf swing and maybe add some weight to it. We're saying, hey, that's fine, you can practice that, but you're missing a layer. And that layer is like the foundation layer of saying, hey, you also need to be making sure, or in replacement, you need to be making sure that you're strengthening the components. We're making sure that your core can show up as the best, most strong, and most functional core when you go play golf. We need to make sure that your shoulder joint shows up as the best, strongest shoulder joint that it can be when you go and play golf and really anything else. We need to make sure your hip joint is showing up as the best, strongest version of itself, right? And so when we're thinking of training the components or the pieces of your body, what this allows your body to do is actually like kind of give nourishment or give a boost to each section, because when we're doing big, grand, gross movements like a big golf swing or a big pickup off the ground, yes, those can be challenging and they can help build your strength. But like what Charlie said, whatever is available to work when you're doing that is going to work. The weak stuff isn't going to be like, oh, well, I guess now I'll jump in and work this. Plus, a lot of times these bigger motions are somewhat of a stimulus to certain areas, but they're not a very direct stimulus to certain areas. So one of the ways that we find, like across the board, every time we have anyone do this, that helps improve their function and helps like regain balance in their body and helps work through compensations in their body, is to start thinking about training the components as your base layer of exercise rather than doing functional training or kind of like mimicry type exercise as their base layer of exercise.
Exactly. So the way I think about it is functional training may be useful if the biggest limiting factor in your ability to perform or do an activity is your skill. Because functional training is skill training, and then you might add some challenge or some load to that, okay? Now, most people are somewhat skill deficient. And so training your skills can be a worthwhile thing, okay? The problem is that the more you train your skills with higher and higher loads, the bigger the risk for injury, and the farther away the challenge or load is from the actual activity that you're doing. For example, if you're going to go shoot a basketball and you have a basketball that weighs a certain amount and you decide, well, functional training would be to take a 50-pound medicine ball and practice my jump shot. All right, the 50-pound medicine ball from a challenge perspective is like complete opposite side of the spectrum of what, how much a basketball actually weighs, okay? The farther removed it is from a challenge standpoint, like the bigger that gap, the less actual transfer it's going to have. All right. So what that means is, yes, most people are skill deficient. So it's worthwhile to practice your skills. But in particular, it's worthwhile to practice your skills doing the actual thing that you're doing, not adding load to it. Because the more load that you're adding and the more, again, the bigger the discrepancy between you doing the activity and you doing the activity under load from a challenge perspective, the less transfer there will actually be to you doing the activity. Now, in addition to that, the other thing that holds people back, because yes, people do have skill deficiency, is people have a strength deficiency and people have a function deficiency, okay? And despite its name being functional training does not improve function. Functional training may improve skill, but it will not improve function, okay? And so if you have a function issue or you have a strength issue, functional training is not your answer, okay? Yes, functional training may have some benefit if you have a skill deficiency. If you have a strength deficiency, which almost everybody does, and if you have a function deficiency, which almost everybody does, functional training will not help to resolve those, okay? Doing more traditional strength training will help to resolve those. And the great part is when you focus on improving your strength and when you focus on improving your function by doing traditional strength training, then when you go and do the activity, which gives you an opportunity to practice your skills, now all of a sudden, you're going to have a body that is stronger and that functions better, and you're going to have a greater ability to execute those skills, which then outside looking in is going to look like, wow, I can do this activity better. Because you can. Because the biggest limiting factors for most people are not so much their skills, but rather their strength and their overall function.
That's right. Last week I was training one of my clients. He's a strong guy, and we were kind of reviewing his program from what he was doing previously. And a lot of this was functional training. Like when he listed it out, I was like, wait, do you usually train like in a garage? Because it was like pick up a sandbag, do some sliding things, do, different like functional movements. And he was like, yeah. I was like, okay, cool. Well, let's get that balanced out by starting to train some of the pieces. And then he also brought up to me, he's like, yeah, and I have this like nagging hamstring tightness. And whenever anything's talking to you, usually, especially like that tight stuff, usually that's always a sign that there's weakness in the area. And I said, well, when's the last time you actually trained your hamstrings? He was like, never. I mean, I train them like in a deadlift or like when I'm doing some other stuff, so they're used in the functional movements, but they're never really tried to be isolated and tried to use the full range. And so I said, yeah, you might have a hamstring problem, but the definite problem is that you have a strength deficit. You're a big, strong guy, but you don't ever practice using your hamstring. So I'm not surprised you have like tight hamstrings, or AKA your hamstrings talk to you regularly and give you, signs and symptoms, because they are regularly deconditioned under like they don't get enough loving throughout the week. And so to balance out that function training that he does is that we're trying to, encourage this more isolation stuff so that each muscle, no matter how they're feeling, can get the highlight that they need throughout the training week.
Exactly. So I have a couple of analogies I want to share to really try to hammer this point home, okay? The first is if you've ever driven your car and you feel it like pulling to the right, okay? Functional training would be like, okay, the car's pulling to the right, so in order to correct this, we need to pull it back to the left. And we're just going to keep driving, continuing to pull the car back to the left. Now, outside looking in, you might be like, oh, wow, like the car is driving straight now, everything is resolved. But you know very well not that everything is not resolved, okay? Traditional training, traditional strength training would be like taking your car to the mechanic, seeing if, the alignment's off, seeing if the tire pressure is off, seeing if, there's actually something going on with the steering or whatever. And then addressing that issue, addressing the pieces, addressing the component parts. And so when you go and drive your car, it no longer pulls to the right, it can drive straight, and you don't have to continuously try to steer it back left to have it go, straight in center. So that's one analogy. Another analogy is, have you ever sung a song on the radio when it comes on?
Yeah.
Yeah, most humans have. Okay.
Yeah.
So there's a couple ways that you can get better at singing the song. One is you can keep playing the song and keep singing it over and over. The other, and oftentimes people will get better at singing the song because they're becoming more familiar with it, right? Another is you could go and take some voice lessons and actually never sing that song, but just get better at using your voice and get better at hitting different notes and expanding your range and everything like that. And then when you go and sing the song, well, you can sing it like way better. And so again, functional training would be like, okay, cool. Like I'm just going to keep singing the song. And most people are like that. And you know what? Most people are really lousy singers. In the grand scheme of like, compared to the people who are actually really good singers, most people are really lousy. All right. Because all they do is just sing the song as it comes on the radio. And they might sing it 1,000 times. It doesn't make them a good singer, right? But then you have somebody who actually goes and trains their voice, and they may have never sung the song before, and they hear it, and they're going to sing it way better than the person who sung it 1,000 times. Why? Because they've trained the individual components of singing the song. So, if you're finding that, you sing a song to yourself when it comes on the radio, and you're like, wow, this doesn't really sound as good as on the radio or when a professional singer sings it? Yeah, because you're doing the singing version of functional training. And so if you're going to apply that concept to your workouts, guess what? There's going to be, let's just say this, there's going to be some shortcomings, just like there will be if you try to pursue your musical career, just singing along with the radio. So anyways, I hope, but one, if not both of those analogies kind of help to hammer this idea home of like training, doing functional training versus training to actually improve your function.
So in the end, you kind of want to think about your physical pursuits in two ways. Like practice the skills that you want to have, right? If you want to be doing big giant bus steps, I have so many clients that are like, I'm going traveling, I want to make sure I can do this big giant bus step. Well, then practice those. But don't put a 50-pound bar on your back to practice that, right? Just practice it. Keep practicing it. Or I had a client one time, she was going to go on a horseback like adventure when she went on her vacation. She's like, I need to be able to like pull myself up there. So we practiced pulling her body weight, but it doesn't mean that we needed to add, a weighted vest to her body to practice that, right? But then when it comes to strengthening, working on your strength, think about separating out the components so that each piece gets its appropriate stimulus so that each joint, each segment of your body can show up and be ready to perform and help you function in your everyday life or in your hobby life.
Absolutely. Now, the thing that's not being said right now about this is both scenarios really only work if your body is functioning well to begin with. Meaning, if you are able to access the muscles that you are trying to work, whether you are doing your skills, whether you're doing your traditional strength training. And so making sure that your brain can connect with your muscles and tell your muscles to contract, that really is the underlying foundation of the whole thing. And that's exactly what we can help you do using muscle activation techniques at our studio, Muscle Activation in Schaumburg. So if you would like to take action on what we are talking about right now, both from a traditional strength training perspective, as well as, hey, making sure that your brain and muscles, everything is communicating well, everything is hooked up and connected, so that you can go and, do the activities that you want and also get the most from your exercise that you're already doing, All you have to do to see our availability and get on our schedule is go to www.matschaumburg.com. On our website, there's a big green button you can click that says Get Started, and you can schedule yourself for your initial MAT consultation and assessment. So who do you know that needs to hear this episode? Who do you know that is really big into functional training and is wondering why they're just not making the progress that they would make, or they feel like they are making progress, and you're like, well, hold up a second. You may be making progress just because you're in a skill deficiency, but once you are tapped out with your skills as far as like how much you will actually improve, your results are going to tap out and plateau as well. So instead, take this other approach that we talked about today. Share this episode with them so they can hear about this other approach to improving their function, to improving their strength outside of just doing regular functional training. Well, thank you so much for being here, everybody. We always appreciate your eyes on YouTube, your ears on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, wherever you consume our content. If you wouldn't mind, leave us a rating and review. We truly appreciate it. We're wishing you a fantastic week, and we'll talk with you all next week.
This podcast is for information purposes only. The statements and views on this podcast are not medical advice. This podcast, including Julie and Charlie Gates, disclaim responsibility for any possible adverse effects from the use of information contained herein. Opinions of guests are their own, and this podcast does not endorse or accept responsibility for statements made by guests. This podcast does not make any representations or warranties about guest qualifications or credibility. This podcast may contain paid endorsements or advertisements for products or services. Individuals on this podcast may have a direct or indirect financial interest in products or services referred to herein. If you think you have a medical issue, consult a licensed physician.